Hello and welcome, I'm Olis Gerjuk and you're watching Head to Head with UATV. Today we're discussing what is on the agenda in Ukraine's parliament this midterm. Joining us in the studio is Serhii Taran, Ukrainian political expert. Hello and thank you for being with us.
Hello.
So, Mr. Taran, what are the major political issues currently being discussed in Ukrainian parliament?
Of course, the major issue is new law on so-called reintegrations of Donbas. According to this law, we will introduce completely new terminology in the Ukrainian political discourse, where we finally name Russia as an aggressor,
yes,
while previously Russia was not even considered as a side of the conflict. And now it's going to be aggressor, according to Ukrainian law. And what is important is that after this law, the same terminology will be used in the international negotiations. And our Western partners will also use the same terminology. And that is new, because previously our Western partners also believed that Russia is not even the side of the conflict. That was the logic of so-called Minsk negotiation. But now it is a side of the conflict, it is the aggressor. And it is pretty important turn in the conflict, because we will probably see further sanctions against Russia, not because Russia does not follow Minsk agreement, but also because Russia is the aggressor, which is a pretty important difference.
What is Russia's reaction on this law?
Very aggressive, of course, and Russia is against this law, and it is very visible. But Russia now has only 37 deputies in the Ukrainian parliament who would support Russian position.
You're talking right now about an attempt to cancel the law, just recent attempt to cancel this law on reintegration of Donbas territory, right?
This attempt was done by oppositional bloc, so-called oppositional bloc. This is the political party which is the successor of the Party of Region, and it is the only one partner of Russia in the Ukrainian politics. I would like to remind you that only 4 years ago we had half of the parliament supporting Russia, but now we have only 37 deputies. So,
and that's kind of a shame list, probably, the names.
It is a clear consequences of Russian aggression. And this is the consequences of Putin's foreign policy in Ukraine. 4 years ago, half of Ukraine believed that Russia is a good partner, that Putin is a great politician, but now it is not the case. So I think it is not wise politics.
But how did this 37 MPs, how did they explain themselves trying to cancel this new law on reintegration?
They say that because of this law, according to their rhetoric, some people in eastern Ukraine who would wait for peace, in fact, would wait for war, because according to this law, we have a war with Russia. So I think it is absolutely empty argument, because we have war anyway, regardless of the law. But oppositional bloc suggests that because of this law we have the war, not vice versa. So I think the rhetoric is pretty poor, and as a result we have finally law introduced in Ukraine, and it is pretty new in our conflict with Russia. And I think what is also important, that this logic is supported by our Western partners.
Sure.
And after this law, we would have further sanctions against Russia. And that is also going to be the consequence of this law.
Would this law change the name of anti-terrorist operation? Would it change the name into the war, the actual official war, or not?
Actually, I think publicly it will be said that it is war.
And during the negotiations among the international experts and politicians, would it be changed into the war also?
I think it will be named as an aggression.
Aggression.
Which is a war,
invasion,
but in other
invasion.
words. Invasion, aggression. And also it will give us further argument to say that we have the same situation in Donbas and the same situations in Crimea. So by this law we can compare two situations in Crimea and Donbas and say that it is actually the same situation. Russia may name it different, but actually it is the same. It is the clear consequences of Russian army who came at our territory and basically annexed two pieces of territory, at Donbas and in Crimea.
In Crimea, right. Could there be any disadvantages about this law on reintegration of Donbas for Ukraine?
Not now, but some experts were saying before that because of this law, our Western partners would say that maybe Ukraine also doesn't want peace, because you see they have rhetorics of war in their law. And actually some partners in the West believe that we have to talk with Russia on the table of negotiation. We have negotiated with Russia.
Directly?
Directly or indirectly, but anyway, they are saying that it is important to talk, but not to fight.
But there is no conversation. There is no perception of Ukrainian conditions from the Russian side.
But that was a danger. But that was a danger of this law. That after that law, some people on the West would say that, well, Ukraine, not only Russia, but also Ukraine, who does not want to follow this peaceful agreement in Minsk. But it did not happen. Anyway, our Western partners supported us, and they support the law. And that was a danger, but now it is not the case. So I think the same rhetoric, which is outlined in the law, will be used by our Western partners. And that was a big victory of the Ukrainian diplomacy.
Well, after this attempt to cancel the law about reintegration of Donbas, what does happen next with it?
The next, we will have further negotiations with Russia, as previously, but we also have Plan B. And Plan B is outlined by Volker, by our American partners, who said, well, if Russia does not want to follow agreement in Minsk, we would have to give to Ukraine lethal weapons,
right.
And to conduct further sanctions against Russia. And that is Plan B. So before the law, we had Plan A as a main plan. But now I am afraid that we will have Plan B as a main plan.
Oh, really? Because after this attempt to cancel, that was not successful. So basically, the head of Verkhovna Rada could sign this law, and then the president could sign it afterwards. So it's going to be valid, but just a little later. Or am I mistaken about this?
It will be later, but again, it will be used as a main guide for dealing with Russia, and it will also be a guide for West to dealing with Russia. And now we have a quite important fact where United States government said publicly that they are going to give us lethal weapon, high technological weapon. The negotiations between two ministries of defense of American ministry and Ukrainian ministry actually had as a consequences final agreement about supplying of lethal weapon in Ukraine.
Yeah, and they're
this is new development.
details.
And this is new development. So I am sure after the law will be signed, we will hear pretty soon that the lethal weapon is already on the Ukrainian territory.
Well, that would be great. And now let's move a little bit onto the law on anti-corruption court. Well, the international community, namely the IMF and World Bank, have expressed serious concerns about the bill. It's a bill, not the law yet. Is there any progress being made?
First of all, I would like to underline that this kind of negotiation between West and Eastern European countries, this kind of negotiations was all the time in the place where all these countries in Eastern Europe conducted reforms. If you look at the history of reforms in Poland, in Romania, in Bulgaria, in Czech Republic, you would see that these reforms were all the time accompanied this kind of suggestions from the West, what should be done. And after these countries done their homework, they became part of European Union.
So basically
now, we have absolutely the same situation when the West is saying what Ukraine should do, and of course not Ukrainian politicians are happy about this, but anyway they will be doing, maybe as a part of compromise, but they will be doing it, what the Brussels or Washington would say. But as a result, all those countries, including Ukraine, will join European Union. It will not be at the same time, but it will be step by step. Coming back to this anti-corruption law. The main discussion now about this anti-corruption, this law, is who is going to appoint the judges to the anti-corruption court. Some partners on the West saying that we should do this. Western partners should appoint the judges. And I think it will be done, but only if it will correspond to the Ukrainian constitution. Because now we cannot say that all judges should be appointed by our Western partners. Our Western partners may make recommendation, crucial recommendation, as Venice Commission is saying, but it is not binding recommendation. It means that final decision will be in Ukraine. Otherwise, it's not going to be according to Ukrainian constitutions.
Of course.
And any group of Ukrainian politicians, people, deputies, can appeal to Constitutional Court, and then this law can be cancelled. So we should avoid this scenario because we need anti-corruption court. So I am sure that after some kind of discussions, there are going to be final decisions where the anti-corruption court will be introduced and judges will be appointed in Ukraine, but with the crucial recommendations of our Western partners.
So basically, Western partners would not appoint, but just recommend.
As Venice Commission is saying, the decisions of international experts have crucial decisions, but not binding decision. So it's going to be a crucial decision, and I think after this, what I would expect, what I would like to expect, that our Western partners would share responsibility for this court.
Of course.
Because if you appoint, you make responsibility.
Yes.
And it should be said very clearly.
And what methods would they choose to appoint somebody for this anti-corruption court? I mean, the judge. Because Western partners, they do not, would they investigate some background of the person, or how would they select Ukrainian staying in Ukraine to become a judge in Ukraine, but from abroad?
Your question is a part of the Ukrainian discussion. That is exactly the argument which is made in Ukraine by saying that we can take into account what our Western partners say, but they cannot make decision. Because how do they know who are these people?
Of course.
So this is the mechanism that must be found in the parliament, and members of the parliament should find mechanism how Western experts can make final, not final, but decisive decision on the membership in the court, but at the same time how they can look for information about those people. And what is also important, how these judges can be removed if necessary, because it's also important to understand, because if somebody abroad makes decision about appointment, logically I can assume that these people can be removed also from abroad.
Also from abroad, right.
But I don't think it's going to be the case. So the search for clear mechanism of appointing judges and removing judges if necessary. I think this is a question which is very important, very acute, and it must be discussed in the parliament in the following week.
Well, yeah, but there is a lot of debate about this because there is a risk of corruption during the process of appointing the judge in Ukraine. So that's why probably international experts and Western partners want to join this process, so they have some control on this. And on the other hand, right, it is pretty hard to appoint somebody not knowing and not investigating enough about the person. But right now, let's move on another topic about electronic declarations. Well, the obligatory e-declarations for NGOs have been criticized by the international community. And President Petro Poroshenko has suggested new rules, not declarations, but some kind of reporting. What solution would you see on this?
I think the solution is very clear. According to what President is saying and what I am sure will be introduced in the Ukrainian parliament, activists personally will not have to report as civic, as governmental officials, as politicians, because now civic activists should report about their profits and their expenditures as politicians. So it's not going to be the case anymore. They will not have to do this. But what will they have to do is that their organizations will have to conduct very clear report about their activity and expenditures. So on the individual level, we will not have declarations. But on the level of organizations, we will have the same declarations, which is a practice of many other countries. If any NGO in the United States, in European Union, receives any grants from abroad, of course they will report about this.
Sure.
But it does not mean that civic activists will be positioned in the same situation as politicians. So I think this practice will be approved in the Ukrainian parliament, and I think it will be accepted by Ukrainian civic activists.
Well, unfortunately, that's all we have time for, but thank you so much for this interesting conversation.
Thank you.
That was Serhii Taran, independent political expert. Thank you for watching and stay with us.